We certainly believed that at some point there would be a day of judgment where even if you were going to go to heaven, you would be called up before God sitting on the literal throne, and everyone who had ever existed would all be there in attendance, including my parents. The wait in line would be horrible. And God's going to be looking at me in the face in heaven and say, you did this and you did this, and detail every lustful thought I've ever had.
Oh no.
Ask me to give an answer for my sin. When you're a teenage boy, there's a certain kind of sin that is maybe the most prevalent in your head. Although I still had recurring nightmares about going to hell as any properly indoctrinated hell believer, I was quite confident in my salvation when I was awake. There were 2 reasons I was homeschooled. We didn't believe in evolution, and of course I couldn't be exposed to that as a kid. Another reason is that I do have a chronic illness, and going to school every day realistically would not have worked out most of the time. I wanted to believe that it was really God that directed me to do all those things. Otherwise, what's the significance of it? Their response was, well, if you don't believe in personal experiences for verifying, these grand phenomena, then why do you believe in God?
Whoa.
We believe in God because of our personal experiences, right? We believe Jesus died on the cross, sure, because of history, but ultimately because we know that we've heard Jesus speak to us. We've heard Jesus or felt Jesus move through us during worship. It was honestly kind of a traumatic thing to even be asked, because it did set me on the path of trying to answer that question.
Mine is the only voice.
Wow.
What have I been doing?
Lay down my autonomy.
After that, it got very dark very quickly.
Hey guys, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening on those podcast platforms and you'd like to see our faces, you can head on over to YouTube at Cults to Consciousness. It does make a huge difference. It supports the show the best possible way. Any way that you can engage with the post, liking, sharing, commenting, really boosts the algorithm and helps more people see it. Today's guest, we have been so excited to collaborate with him. He has a huge channel talking about religion from a secular viewpoint. He talks about it through an atheist lens. I'm so excited to talk about his specific story growing up in fundamentalist evangelical Christianity and how he was inspired to leave it all behind through essential oils. We got a story here, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Drew from Genetically Modified Skeptic.
Hey guys, I'm really happy to be here. Seen a lot of great content from Cults to Consciousness, so just honored to be able to throw my hat in the ring and be a part of it.
Yes, and we're actually both in Austin, which was such a fun surprise to find out on the phone. I was like, oh my gosh, more YouTube friends. This is great.
Yeah, I feel like, Austin's a bit of a media hub, and it's not all good, but I'm glad that there's another positive voice in the city.
Yes, we'll take it. So your channel is huge. You go over so many different things within the Bible or within certain religious spectrum ideas, and you're so full of knowledge. I cannot wait to pick your brain and hear everything that you have to say about your deconstruction and also what you've learned since growing your channel, some of the favorite things that you like to do on your channel. So let's dive into your story first. Tell everybody a little bit about where you grew up and kind of the backdrop of your childhood.
I grew up in Texas, in North Texas, near the DFW area, and like plenty of people there, not everyone, but more people than you would think. I grew up independent fundamental Baptist. So when it's a pet peeve of mine when people call something fundamentalist, like if someone says, fundamentalist Islam, fundamentalist Hinduism, fundamentalist Jainism even. Fundamentalism means something very, very specific, and it only actually exists within Protestant Christianity.
Oh, interesting. I'm learning something new because if you look at our channel, we do that.
Well, no, it's really, really common. I can't fault people who do, because it's just become a way to say this is really extreme, this is really dogmatic,
Right.
And to say that fundamentalist Christianity is extreme and dogmatic is totally accurate. So when I say independent fundamental Baptist, a lot of people probably actually know, because they understand what fundamentalism means roughly, when it comes to dogma, what this kind of Christianity looks like. So we had very strict gender roles. I like to say that the new fundamental Baptist church that has people like Steven Anderson, they say slurs out loud and in public. And my denomination said slurs behind closed doors. We were obviously very homophobic, very transphobic, misogynistic. There's a lot of anti-science stuff going on there. So I was brought up as a young earth creationist. I was taught that it was scientifically demonstrable that the earth was about 6,000 years old and was created in 6 literal days. The Grand Canyon was obviously formed by the worldwide flood of the, Noah's flood story.
Oh, I haven't heard that one before.
There were plenty of other wacky and fun anti-science beliefs that went along with all of that. While people may not know what fundamentalism means, in that it goes back to an early 20th century book called The Fundamentals, they do often understand when I say, oh, I was a fundamentalist Christian, what that actually entails.
Yeah, so I do think it's interesting that certain denominations of Christianity view the Bible in certain ways, or they pick and choose things that they're going to latch onto specifically, and that in some ways distinguishes these different Christian sects. So yours was a sect that quite literally used the Bible as this is historical, this happened.
Oh, absolutely. The Bible is the purest source of historical and scientific fact that has ever existed and will ever exist. It is God's literal word, breathed and inspired by the Holy Spirit. So interestingly, as I learned about Islam as I got older, I realized that the way that I was brought up within Christianity actually looked much more like Islam in the way that we saw scripture and its role. So most Christians historically have looked at the Bible as men were inspired to write these things, and there maybe are still some biases from the authors of the books that are within the content of the books. We believed that no, every single word in every single language that the Bible was ever translated to, including and especially English, was directly inspired by God. And when I say inspired, I mean God planted that word in the person's head. So the way that I imagined the Apostle Paul, for instance, writing his letters to the Corinthians, it was not Paul thinks, what do I need to say to the Corinthians? Let me write that down and send this in a letter. It was, oh, I'm feeling something. There's something taking over my body. There's something controlling my hand. I'm writing this, and I'm this isn't even me. I essentially thought that God did spirit possession of people's bodies in order to write the biblical text. And then when the biblical text was translated from various languages into various languages, that happened again. So the King James Bible, for instance, was directly influenced, and I suppose it was a direct product of spirit possession by God.
Right. That's interesting. I haven't heard it taken to that length of even the translation. So even within Mormonism, they say we believe in the Bible as far as it is translated correctly. So even they're like, maybe there's something off here. But then, of course, Joseph Smith took it upon himself to further translate whatever he wanted to add and change to it. So how do you view the Bible as it is now from your secular atheist perspective?
I think a lot of people expect me to say that, for lack of a better phrase here, that the Bible sucks and I don't like it. And that's very much not true. I obviously don't see the Bible as a product of spirit possession. I think that it arose organically, that you can see the product of the authors and the many author-specific socio-political contexts in the writing. And I think that viewing it as a product of humankind trying to either improve themselves, to create communities that were worthwhile, trying to establish political dominance, trying to control other people. If we see the Bible as that, it's actually much, much more interesting. There are infinite mysteries within its pages and its words when we realize that it is a product of an infinitely complex series of interacting factors, social, political, psychological. So I really, really like reading and studying the Bible now as an atheist. because it's just one of the most interesting historical and mythical texts that one could ever read. Why wouldn't I like it?
Great points. So let's get back to the brain of little Drew. When you were growing up with this type of dogmatic approaches and you are learning about the Bible, are you taking this all in, or from a young age were you already a little skeptical?
I think people expect me to say that I was a really skeptical kid and then I asked all the questions in Sunday school and got in trouble. And this is a really common atheist ex-Christian story. I wasn't that kid. I did well in school and asked a lot of questions, for sure. But I was also the kid in Sunday school that was trying to influence the other kids to be respectful and listen to the Sunday school teacher rather than, I don't know, flicking each other with rubber bands or something. I was the good kid in Sunday school. And that continued through high school, through college. I took it very, very seriously that every time we were at church, every time we opened the Bible, every time we prayed, every time we had a conversation about the spiritual, we needed to show reverence for that moment and that context. You know, God is watching us at all times, but at these specific times, maybe there's a little extra scrutiny going on. So we need to behave. After all, this is a matter of life and death, isn't it? And for us, it wasn't even just a matter of life and death. This is a matter of your ultimate eternal fate. We very much believed in an eternal, physically painful, excruciating burning in hellfire for forever and ever. And so with that kind of consequence in my mind at all times, you know, if I'm bad, I will be punished in this way. I was pretty motivated to be the good kid, not the questioning kid.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have any core memories or moments that you can think of from your childhood that really illustrate that fear or that compliance due to the fear?
I have a couple. In Sunday school, I was often the kid that was telling others, hey, stop scribbling in your notebook. Hey, stop being on your phone. Stop texting. And there were times that I actually looked over at a friend who was texting and did all but snatch the phone out of their hand and told them, what you're doing is so disrespectful. The youth pastor is preaching to us right now, and he's talking about the book of Ezra and the revival that happened in the Jewish context of the time, about how people were basically hungry and thirsty for the living word of God. And the word of God is being presented to you right now, and you're not hungering or thirsting for it. Instead, you have your phone in your hand and your nose in your phone. This is perverse what you're doing. That didn't make me a very popular 13-year-old.
13. Yeah, even in the age when you're trying to fit in, you're like, no, guys, do better.
Yeah. And also, so I grew up rollerblading and not just kind of rollerblading around in a circle at the roller rink, but going to skate parks and doing tricks. And that was my hobby growing up. And my parents allowed me to take it very seriously by sending me to skate camp in California several times, Woodward Skate Camp, if anyone's ever heard of that. And that was some of my only exposure to people who didn't grow up in the same like kind of religious context that I did. So once a year, I would pack up my rollerblades, go to skate camp, be in a cabin with all of these other 15-year-old boys and hear swearing and see them passing around like explicit photos on their phones and saying rude things about women, and also sometimes saying religious things that I didn't agree with. Especially one time I had a bunkmate that was from Denmark, and he said, I don't even remember the context surrounding this, but he said, who the fuck wrote the Bible? The Bible was just scribbled down one day by some dumb person who didn't know anything. And me, being the fundamentalist Baptist from Texas, I could not stand for that blasphemy. So right then and there, in front of 25 other guys that I wanted to like me as a teenager that was susceptible to peer pressure like that, I got in a debate with this kid about the historical and scientific accuracy and reliability of the Bible. I told them about how there's over 40 authors of the Bible, and the Bible was written over 1,500 years of time, and yet there's not a single error or contradiction. Only divine inspiration could actually allow a group of people to accomplish a literary feat like that? And then they all just stared at me, and the guy from Denmark said, "What's wrong with you?"
Oh my gosh. So in that moment, standing up to that guy, were you feeling so proud or did you feel embarrassed?
I think that I certainly felt some moral satisfaction in that I was acting as a missionary at that time, bringing this to people who obviously in atheist Scandinavia had never heard of the Christian God. Um, and so there was some pleasure I took in that, certainly. But like anyone else, being surrounded by people who disagreed with me and were very clearly and visibly judging me for saying the things I said, I probably turned pretty red and was a bit embarrassed. I was worried they wouldn't want to be friends with me anymore, that they would treat me badly after this. And fortunately, that was not the case. Those boys from Denmark, especially, were actually very nice to me after that for some reason.
Go figure.
So I don't know, maybe there was something I really should have learned from them.
I certainly have some stories like that of my own of preaching to Russians who could barely speak English about the Book of Mormon.
Oh, great.
And I think it was the first time that I heard myself say it out loud, and I've said this before, but it's so relevant because you had a similar experience. They were like, "Oh, wow, Book of Mormon." And we're like, "Yeah, it's another testament of Jesus. Jesus came to the people in the Americas and, write this down." And they're like, "Oh, cool. Where's the book now? Can we look at it?" And we're like, and in my head, I actually didn't know that answer, but even though it was taught to me in some Sunday school lesson, my friend, though, who was Mormon, she was like, "Oh, angels took it back to heaven." And I was like, that sounds insane.
It's little sus, yeah.
How convenient. So, yeah, that was one moment where I was like, huh, never said that out loud. I don't know if I liked the way that, and they're looking at us like, sure.
I kind of wish that I had more of an aha moment at skate camp. Instead, I just had a moment that divided me from the other kids and required their mercy in order for me to continue being friends with anyone.
So what was your friend group like at home? Were you allowed to have worldly friends?
I was homeschooled, and so the material factor of my life as a homeschooler is really the most influential thing here. There were two reasons I was homeschooled. One, we didn't believe in evolution, and evolution is taught in schools. I live in Texas, so kind of, but not very well. And of course, I couldn't be exposed to that as a kid. Another reason is that I do have a chronic illness, and going to school every day realistically would not have worked out most of the time. So homeschooling, one way or another, made sense. But that meant that I mostly made friends with my church youth group, just the kids at church youth group. That was my main social sphere. I was at church an hour early before Sunday school every Sunday. So we got there at, I want to say, 7:30 or 8 a.m., usually around 7:30. And then we had Sunday school at 9. So I just hung out with the other people who got there early before Sunday school. And then we had service that went until 12. And then we hung out for a little while after. And then on Sunday night, we were also at church for about 2 hours. Then on Wednesdays, we also got there early, and I was there for something like 3 hours every Wednesday night.
Wow.
Then there were other things that happened throughout the week that were more occasional and sporadic, but it was pretty common for me to be at church 4 times a week, but I was always at church 3 times a week. So clearly I'm going to make friends with people at my youth group the most. They're the people I see the most.
Mhm.
Sometimes I had friends that I met at the skate park, and I just didn't really tell anybody else about me being friends with guys who smoked weed and said bad words.
That was your tiny little rebellion?
Yeah, I didn't even smoke the weed and say bad words. I kept my testimony very pure, as you could say. The worst I ever did was I was in a circle and someone handed me a joint and I passed it to the next person and tried not to take a breath. But no, I never transgressed beyond simply being in the presence of some of these guys. And that was pretty easy given that my fundamentalist youth group was the real social pressure that I experience on a day-to-day basis.
Would you have gotten in trouble if someone found out about your friends?
I think so. I think that the number one consequence that I'd actually have is that my youth group friends' parents would be upset that I was friends with these people. In fact, I was allowed to listen to secular music growing up, and essentially everyone else in my fundamentalist church was not. It was a very common occurrence throughout my teenage years that I would roll up to church. I had a car from the age of 16, and people would hear me listening to the Ramones or Joan Jett or Matt and Kim or Vampire Weekend, these very innocuous kind of general rock and roll bands. And my friends' parents would hear that, I guess, radiating out of the car as I pulled up into the parking lot at church. And then they would tell their kids not to hang out with me
Oh,
and would go to my mom
no.
and say, why are you letting your son do this? Or do you know that your son is listening to secular music behind your back? And she would respond, yeah, I introduced him to secular music. We listened to Aretha Franklin and the Temptations all the time, and that's fine. Is it dishonoring to God to express joy through music as long as you're not talking about something obscene? Of course not. They didn't like that answer from her. So yes, I would certainly have consequences for being friends with the occasional weed smoking skater guy, but not as much from my parents, more from my friends' parents.
Okay, so your mom had a good head on her shoulders. She was like, yeah, we can do this thing, but I'm also gonna do this because it sounds reasonable.
I think that ultimately my mom was a musician when she was in her teenage years and early 20s. And she just couldn't suppress her own passion for music and suppress mine. I think that's really what drove that.
Yeah. Was that the only role that she was lax on then?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. No, if I had told my mom that I hung out with someone who was smoking weed at the time, she would basically be like, well, you have a car, so I know that you have the capability of seeing them again, but you should never see them again. Yeah, with music, she was much more lax. If she found out, for instance, that I like had sex before marriage or something, which I didn't, if she found out that, had I done that, it would have been catastrophic. Yeah.
Mm.
But music was okay.
So it sounds like we had similar paths as far as we were both following the rules to an extent to where we felt comfortable and confident that we were going to heaven, and there wasn't much of a scare like, oh no, I'm definitely going to go to hell if I die right now. Would you say that that's the case for you?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I was very confident that I was not going to hell, although I still had recurring nightmares about going to hell, as any
Oh,
properly indoctrinated hell believer, I think, usually does. I was quite confident in my salvation when I was awake, the vast majority of the time, though, and confident that my moral behavior was sufficient to not anger God too much.
got it. That's interesting. It's a very subliminal, unconscious thing that was going on in your brain, the fear. And would you say though it was truly the fear that kept you on the path, or was it just the need to want to get to heaven?
Mm.
Because those are different, wouldn't you say?
Yes, yeah.
Like, being rewarded is like, yes, I'm gonna go to for Mormonism, the top level of heaven because I'm good and I'm a good student of this religion versus, oh, I probably shouldn't steal that because I don't want to go to hell.
Yeah. It's a really great question, and I think the honest answer is it depended on the day.
Mm,
If I was feeling confident in myself, in that I had the capability, the capacity to do good, to change things on earth, to win souls for the kingdom of God, I was motivated that day to stay on the straight and narrow by the desire to do good and to be rewarded. But when I was getting low, or when I really wanted to do something that was sinful and I didn't think that it was going to hurt me, it was definitely fear that kept me on that straight and narrow path.
mm-hmm.
As a teenage boy, like having lustful thoughts, I certainly was not trying to not have lustful thoughts because I was trying to be good. I was trying not to have lustful thoughts because I thought, well, not this, but oh shit, I'm gonna go to hell, or if when I get to heaven, before I get let into heaven, God is going to bring me in front of everyone I know, including my parents, and detail every lustful thought I've ever had.
Oh
So I better
no.
make sure that I am not thinking about, completely normal things for any teenager to think about.
Was that something that was explicitly taught?
Yeah. So I don't know how the eschatology of other Christians lines up with this, but we certainly believed that at some point there would be a day of judgment where even if you were going to go to heaven, you would be called up before God sitting on the literal throne, and everyone who had ever existed would all be there in attendance. The wait in line would be horrible. I certainly had this idea of, okay, I'm going to go before the throne and God's going to be looking at me in the face in heaven and say, you did this and you did this and you did this and you did this, and would not just list it, but ask me why. Ask me to give an answer for my sin. And again, when you're a teenage boy, there's a certain kind of sin that is maybe the most prevalent in your head, which again, healthy and normal. But picturing my mom and dad and my sister being there while I'm having certain thoughts all detailed out in front of God and everyone in the universe, that's a gross and horrifying thought. And I thought that, well, at least basically all other men are going to be up there doing this. So maybe I'll be in company, not good company, but company while this is happening. And after that, since I did receive salvation, I will go to heaven. I'm just going to go to heaven really embarrassed.
Got it. Wow, that's intense. We had the version of a life review, and I also can't distinguish if this is something that my mom just taught or if this was Mormonism specifically, but it was you would be put in a room and you would watch a movie of your life, and any person you ever hurt or wronged, you would feel the pain that you caused them. And to me, that seemed pretty reasonable and helped me. I guess it helped me gain a sense of empathy and compassion in the moment if I was doing something that I feel like would hurt somebody. It was more of like, ooh, I don't know if I want to feel the opposite end of this later on.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of building a narrative structure up to reinforce the golden rule, which isn't
Yeah.
terrible in the end of it.
Yeah, for sure. I wasn't against that one. It definitely made me think, which is good because you want kids to think about how their actions affect other people, but yours sounds grueling and horrible.
Yeah, it's pretty terrifying. And when you're a kid, I think that you're more afraid of embarrassment than almost anything else. And this was the ultimate embarrassment you could suffer.
So, aside from the health thing, I found it interesting in our conversation before this that there were some underlying tones of white supremacy that were in hiding cloaked in hiding with Christian identity or Christian doctrine or Christian theology. And I really wanted to get into that because I find it so interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll say that I did not really realize that I grew up surrounded with white supremacist propaganda until maybe the last couple of years. In just the way that I've taken my own content on my channel, fighting, white supremacist narratives, this is something that I've learned about, the way that these things hide, the way that children are indoctrinated with these. And I realized, I have a very vivid memory of being indoctrinated with this stuff at church. I want to say that my mom was a history teacher and taught her history class at the homeschool co-op that slavery was obviously bad, that it was evil, that it was, a crime against humanity and a sin, that Jim Crow was an extension of slavery and was still horrible. Segregation was obviously bad, and that desegregation was the obvious answer to that, that there really was no such thing as race. And I remember reading a biography written for kids about Frederick Douglass, very famous activist and abolitionist. And I grew up with Frederick Douglass being one of my kind of like heroes in a way. Meanwhile, I went to church that my parents took me to and endorsed the messaging of 99% of the time, and heard messages that went against a lot of the proto anti-racist stuff that my mom actually taught me. One time at my fundamentalist church, there was an ex-Muslim guy that came and delivered a lecture. And the import of that was that Islam is very alien and frightening, and there are these painful rituals that all Muslims do surrounding reading the Quran. Like, if you accidentally touch the Quran before doing a purifying ritual, there are ritual washing rituals within Islam, then you need to be physically punished, even to the point of torture. And that's not true generally with the vast majority of Muslims. I don't even know where he got that. But the most frightening thing that he taught was, okay, Muslims breed way more than Christians do. They also have completely different values than us. And maybe the people that are more likely to be Muslims have some genetic propensities toward violence.
Genetic propensities?
Yeah, predispositions, basically this is saying that Arabs are dangerous and maybe less human and more violent and less intelligent than white people, without directly saying that. No, the code word was Muslim rather than, Arab or African, right?
Yikes.
So he goes on this big tirade with all of these facts and figures, these graphs that were presented. I remember this lasting at least a couple of hours, a very long sermon for my church, where he's saying, look, this is how fast, like, the Muslims everywhere, I guess, are breeding. This is how fast the Christians, white Christians in America who are Protestant, are breeding. By such and such year, I think it was in the 2040s, Muslims are going to have nowhere else to go in their own countries. So they're going to invade our country. And then, because they want to keep breeding, they're going to take your women and they're going to breed with them. And then your kid is not going to be a Christian. He's going to be a Muslim, which is code for he's not going to be white anymore. And
Yeah.
I did not think that this was in any way relevant or related to racism, and neither did my parents. We didn't think that this was in any way a form of bigotry. It was simply, there's an ex-Muslim man who's telling us that we need to be careful because there is a threat to us, to our lives, and to Christianity. And it's rational to want to continue your existence and rational to want Christianity to be triumphant if you were a Christian. But baked into this was essentially the same ideas that the KKK has pushed in this country for well over a century. This is maybe today called the Great Replacement Conspiracy Theory, but before that, it could have been called nativism. It also could have been called white genocide, which is something that people probably have heard bouncing around Twitter even these days, relevant to South Africans. Supposedly there's a white genocide against South Africans, white South Africans. It's disturbing to look back and realize how steeped in vile and violently racist conspiratorial rhetoric my entire community was, while we were also taught that racism and bigotry of all forms is a sin. It's almost like the way that we thought about racism was as an abstract thing that exists out there, a menace with no real form that could not really be identified if it were to rear its ugly head. It is simply something that we're supposed to say, oh, we think that it's bad. Racism is bad. And once we do that, we don't have to look around and see how it might be cropping up in our daily lives. Now that we say racism is bad and we put that out there as a belief that we have, we don't need to be careful about maybe being racist even on accident.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I just did some interviews with some former white supremacists, and what you just said could have easily been one of their talks about that was the plan, is we just need to have more white children or else there won't be white children anymore. And also, though, the other fundamentalist Christians that we've had on talking about the Quiverfull movement and have, as many kids as you can in your quiver so you can shoot the arrows out into the world and penetrate all forms of society. Did you have that too?
Yes. My parents definitely taught me specifically that verse, and as a child, I was the one in my family that said, "Oh, I want to have a lot of kids. I want to have at least 5 kids because of the Quiverfull verse." I think that
Wow.
yeah. I think that my older sister thought, "Well, maybe that's a few too many, but I wanna have kids." I could understand why maybe a woman would take it a little bit more seriously, having that many kids rather than me. There's a little less work in that for me. That said, we did watch 18 Kids and Counting, 19 Kids and Counting, and so on as they continue to change the name as Michelle Duggar had more kids.
Yeah.
Um, we watched that as a family, and particularly my mom had a positive reaction to the way that they homeschooled their kids, taught their kids violin, taught them manners, the fact that Jim Bob Duggar was involved in Republican politics, all that was great. But my mom was not cool with how it seemed like Michelle Duggar was really just used as a thing, an object to produce children,
Mm-hmm.
and had to talk with this hushed tone and, keep sweet, pray and obey. My mom is not like that. My mom is very loud and will tell you, what she thinks about things unapologetically while being very outspokenly Christian at the same time. So
Mm.
I did want to have several kids, but I do think that I did have some doubt about the idea of having so many kids and about the health of having so many kids. And so I thought, there's a reason why the Bible says 5, because 5 is about a good number. More than that's okay, but if you're getting up in the teens, I think you maybe need to give mom a break.
That's very compassionate of you to think of that at a young age. Were you also involved in the Bill Gothard stuff, the IBLP, if you were into the Duggar family?
My friends at church, not consistently, but several of my friends at church were into the Bill Gothard stuff. Uh, we were homeschoolers primarily at our church, and that was for religious reasons. And so naturally, the Bill Gothard IBLP stuff reared its ugly head in many conversations with my friends, and especially with my friends' parents when they were referencing why I was doing something wrong.
Mm.
My mom certainly brought us into circles with people who were interested in the Bill Gothard stuff and maybe even taught their kids in that way. But she never got into it for us and for our family. As you might be able to tell, I lived in kind of a matriarchal family, which set us apart in some ways from the other fundamentalist families that we were friends with. My mom brought us into social circles with these people, but I think that the more that my mom learned about the Bill Gothard stuff, the more she realized how abusive it really is, especially
Mm-hmm.
spanking 2-year-old children. Uh, I remember that being something that she would rant and rave against, rightly so, and say, "That's disgusting. Why would you ever hit a baby? That's terrible."
Mm-hmm.
And then also the vocal training that essentially all women have to go through under the IBLP garbage. Uh, she was not okay with. So we were our own unique version of fundamentalist Christian homeschoolers.
Okay. Yeah, that's so interesting. All those worlds collide and kind of enmesh within each other. And so I wondered how, if you were connected to it. So adjacent.
Yeah. I will say, I do believe as a kid, I was shown that famous diagram with the umbrellas. So if you are just listening to this, I suppose, this diagram from the IBLP cult goes, there's a big umbrella and it's labeled God, and there's a slightly smaller umbrella underneath that labeled husband, and then an even smaller umbrella under that labeled wife, and then the smallest umbrella under wife that says children. And this is just a visual representation of how the family structure should work. Men submit to God, and God's the ultimate authority. Women submit to men, and then children submit to women, men, and God.
Mm-hmm.
And I was certainly taught that, absolutely taught that. But again, my mom had a very strong personality, and that meant that eh, maybe those umbrellas got switched up sometimes.
Yeah. I like the way your mom thinks. So let's get into your college years then, unless there's something that is extremely relevant to your story in your teenage high school years that we didn't get to.
College years, let's go.
Okay. Where did you go? What did you study? What were you still super invested even though you were out into the world now? Because this is the first time going to a public school, right? So it must have been quite a new experience.
Well, you would think that. Not so much. I went to an evangelical Christian college that was quite conservative
Okay.
in East Texas. Deep in East Texas. I tend not to say exactly where because it's essentially to protect my favorite professor who still works there and who I love and thank for any good thing that I took away from my education. But deep East Texas in a town that was very segregated, very racist, very Christian, and had a Christian campus within the town that essentially acted completely as an island separate from the rest of the city. So we had a campus that didn't cross paths or have any roads going through it physically that were a part of the rest of the city. We completely had our own land and everything. The vast majority of my time in college for 3.5 years, I graduated a little bit fast, was spent inside of a literal gate in this East Texas town where the vast majority of people at the school believed something relatively close to what I believed as a child and what my parents taught me.
Mm.
In some ways, I might say that the Christianity that my school preached was actually more similar to my mother's Christianity than it was to my church's Christianity growing up. So, yes, while I moved away from home at 18 and went to college, lived in the dorm, got a girlfriend, all of these college experiences, my friends didn't really curse. Everyone was a Christian. If you were not a Christian, there certainly would be social consequences to pay. At my school, in order to graduate or pass each semester, you had to have so many hours of mandatory chapel credits, is what they called them.
Oh.
And this meant that you had to do a 5-minute minimum devotional in every single class. I mean, if you had 4 classes back to back, you had 4 devotionals back to back. And then on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, you had to go to chapel for an hour, which was essentially a church service. And then most people also went to church on Sunday mornings and often also did worship services on campus on Sunday nights. So this was church even more than how I grew up.
Yeah.
It was an environment that was purposely shaped to reinforce certain Christian ideas while they taught you ideas that might cause a fundamentalist Christian, especially, to question Christianity.
Interesting.
So an example of this is it was a STEM school. It's primarily an engineering school, although I went there for psychology. In psychology courses, we would be taught about the way that people can bind together in a social environment and create a collective feeling, that maybe Emil Durkheim would call collective effervescence, of self-transcendence, of ego death, if you want to say that, and that often occurs in religious contexts. Okay, we're taught that. You go to the next class, you do a devotional, and you engage in something close to collective effervescence, and it's never applied to what we were doing, right? Like the curriculum and the chapel stayed totally separate. And I think that the constant reinforcing of certain Christian ideas was necessary to maintain the mindset that they wanted their students to embody.
That's interesting because you would think it would start to create a divide or some cognitive dissonance of my professor is telling me these ideas, but wait, it's happening over here. Did most people just, I guess, and this happens all the time, you don't really see it until you're out and you can look back and be like, oh, clearly we were doing the thing that they were teaching about. Did any of that start to happen at that time for you?
At the end of college, maybe my second to last semester, I was just starting to see this. I was really, really interested in psychology. I was the kid in class who would not only, pay attention to the teacher, engage in class, do the homework, and get a decent grade. I also read everything that was in the textbook because I just wanted to. So I took a really active role in my own education. I suppose that was something that homeschooling taught me to do. Yes, at a certain point, I was thinking in chapel, my friends often have a stronger spiritual reaction and spiritual experience and communion with God when we have a band playing that's good rather than a band that isn't good, or a band that has a really heavy bassy sound. An example of this is I was in chapel with one of my friends, and we had a band from out of town come in, and it was even more of a rock concert than usual. And they had this kick drum sound that was blasted out to 2,000 students in this auditorium, essentially. That was just, I was like penetrating. You could feel the bass drum in your chest. And I remember being really physically uncomfortable. I didn't like it. And so I was totally out of the moment. And my friend next to me, who really liked worship music and sang praise songs on her own every day, loved the band, clearly. She's raising her hand, she's kind of swaying, and she looks over at me with just the purest sincerity that you could imagine and says, "Can you feel him?"
Oh.
Yeah, I think that's the right reaction, is almost pity. I was physically uncomfortable because the band was too loud and she was captured.
Enveloped.
Yeah, enveloped
Yeah.
by this. And of course, I could not be the person to say, "Well, are you sure that's not just the bass drum because it's way louder than usual?" I just said, "Oh, yeah, yeah." And she kept worshiping. Um, Experiences like that in the beginning of my senior year started to make me think maybe the environment that they are putting us in, constantly being just bombarded by spiritual messaging and spiritual experiences, is a way to try to reinforce what they want us to believe, regardless of the actual factual information that they teach us in classes.
Yeah, it's so interesting. We had someone who told us that they were part of Hillsong, the mega church, when it was a record label, and it was his job to create music that would specifically create an emotional response in the audience at very specific times.
Right.
And so they're doing this on purpose. We know that. And I want to ask you a question from your atheistic perspective. Do you think it's possible that that type of music, although it's manufactured spiritual experiences, or at least that's their intent, do you think it's possible that music can lift up someone in such a meditative state to where they are having some sort of spiritual experience and the music was just the conduit?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I suppose it depends on what you mean by spiritual.
Yeah, however you want to define it, because that would mean you would have to believe in some sort of otherworldly, higher power type
Right.
of situation, or ghosts and angels and stuff like that. I
Yeah.
guess, yeah, you would have to define spiritual experience. And are you of the camp? I mean, you're an atheist, so you don't believe in any sort of higher power, right?
No. In fact, I don't believe in supernatural forces at all, spirits, ghosts. There are atheists who are, my friend's an atheist who's really into astrology and does believe in ghosts. And, that's, if that's what you want to do, you can do that. But no, that's not me. I'm definitely like a naturalist or materialist.
Okay, so from your perspective then, what do you think is going on in the brain to create that sort of euphoria when this band is playing? Is it just the beats that are having your body have this sort of material, physical, cellular experience?
I don't think that we are convening with any kind of literal spiritual substance, of course. I think that humans are a social species. We evolved both before being Homo sapiens and as Homo sapiens to band together, to share experiences, to bond for the sake of our own survival.
Mhm.
So I think there's a lot of mechanisms within the physical brain that essentially allows us to facilitate the kind of communication and shared experiences that we need in order to have the kind of social structure we need to survive. So music, I think, has been used across essentially all cultures, all spiritualities, and all frames of time to allow humans to share an experience, to bond, to express various emotions that need to be communally discussed, essentially. And so I think that, when we are getting together in a chapel service and there's music playing and we're not just feeling the music, but feeling ourselves and feeling other people all engage in this collective experience, and we are starting to, for lack of a better term, transcend our normal experience of consciousness and instead feel like we're just a part of a whole. That's something that is happening physically within our brains. And if you want to call that spiritual, that's fine with me, because I do think that a flaw in kind of the new atheist perspective that arose with people like Richard Dawkins was saying that sort of experience is actually not particularly significant because it is not spiritual.
Oh, okay.
That's a Christian point of view, in my opinion. No, I think that these experiences that we have with collective effervescence, whether it's dancing around a campfire while taking hallucinogens like people have for hundreds of thousands or millions of years, or it's all being together in church singing a worship song, these are things that allow humanity to socialize in the way that allows us to successfully build social structures that benefits all of us, hopefully. And
sure.
that's significant. Yeah, if you want to call it spiritual, that's fine.
I like that term, collective effervescence. I'm going to use that from now on, if I can remember it. But I like that. So do you ever dive into quantum physics as a way of explaining energetic transference or energetic collective experiences?
No, I wouldn't be the person, certainly, to say anything about quantum physics. But I also don't really think that it's necessary to view these spiritual experiences through the lens of anything but the kind of macroscopic neuropsychological framework to understand how or why these things work. I think that we have quite literal neural structures in our brains that allow us to perceive a lot of information from other people just by looking at them, smelling them, hearing them. And it allows us to have a connection that is so strong that I think it motivates a lot of people to think there must be some kind of almost telepathic data or energy transfer between us. It can't just be the way that our brains are communicating based on external stimuli. But don't downplay the external stimuli and what your brain can do with that. I mean, it's powerful to the point of being spiritual.
Okay, interesting. So when does essential oils come into play?
Yeah. In my freshman year of college, my entire immediate family started getting into Young Living Essential Oils, which is a multi-level marketing company that is the proper term for essentially a legalized product carrying pyramid scheme. While it's very common to have a religious viewpoint in pyramid schemes of various kinds, Young Living was a particularly glaring example of this. There was a founding myth for the company that was, well, will be familiar to you as a Mormon, let's just say, or as an ex-Mormon, right? I'll back up a little bit and say, I go off to college freshman year, and I start hearing from my parents, over the phone, that they're getting into this thing called Young Living, that they found these things called essential oils that are really helping my mom with her chronic health problems, and that they want to tell me about them. At some point, I visit my family and they tell me all about them. I trust them, as I always had, and believe that, yeah, okay, these essential oils can help you with headaches, and they can work as bug spray, and they can relieve your allergies, and maybe even cut down on inflammation and some of the pain that can result from that. Relatively minor things these oils can help with. And I also believe them when they said that, well, all we have to do is recruit a few people, and they'll recruit a few people, and those people will recruit a few people, and we'll be making thousands of dollars a month, and we'll be good to go. You won't even need to look for a job by the time you get done with college. I bought all of that because I was 18 and trusted what my parents said. As time went on, my family starts teaching classes about Young Living essential oils. I attend some of these, very supportive, until I hear that the founder, Gary Young, apparently was paralyzed in a logging accident in his early 20s and then discovered essential oils through spiritual, prayerful practice. It's not totally clear, but maybe God spoke to him in his head and told him to use essential oils on himself. Gary Young develops something called the raindrop technique, which is just dropping certain oil blends, proprietary Young Living oil blends, on certain parts of your body in order to promote healing. And relatively quickly, young Gary Young, with God's direct intervention, heals his own paralysis without the use of any other medicine.
Big claim.
Yeah, this is something that my parents believe. And I'm thinking, wait, okay, this is a miracle story like Catholics believe. We don't believe that stuff. Like this is something that would be in the Bible, in the book of Acts, and we don't think that stuff happens the same way anymore, do we? Apparently, I did not think miracles really happened much anymore, but they did. And that was a little bit of a divide. This divide gets even worse when they start to say, oh, the US government is purposely persecuting people that use essential oils as a spiritual and medical practice.
Not the P word.
Yeah. Essential oils are God's true medicine that Jesus gave us.
Oh.
That Jesus
Big claim.
practiced. Yeah. The US government wants to suppress this because they want to suppress true Christianity, and also Big Pharma wants to make a lot of money. Of course, Big Pharma wants to make a lot of money, but are they persecuting Christians in order to do it? I don't know about that. I was getting really weirded out. I think that's the best way that I could describe it, because I couldn't really put it into words exactly what the problem was. I just knew this is way outside of the Christian purview that I'm used to and the medical purview that I grew up believing, essentially. I decided to dig into the company a little bit more. I really will actually say my wife, who was then my girlfriend, really started looking into the company more and basically showing me old news articles about the founder being a fraudster who got arrested for practicing medicine without a license, went and did a medical practice in Mexico where he gave people Laetrile, which is a substance that produces cyanide within the body and can kill people. And this was supposed to be a treatment for cancer. That he fled Mexico because he got in trouble for that, and he moved to California. He developed this health club, essentially called the Golden Six Health Club, where he performed water births for people, including for his own wife, where he killed his own child by holding her under the water in a jacuzzi at a health club for over an hour.
What?
I'm hearing all this stuff as, I don't know, a 19, 20-year-old, and thinking, this guy's insane. The person who founded this and is still running this is insane. I have to tell my family about this. This isn't okay.
Yeah.
I tell my family about this. And I mean, when I say that it was reflexive, I mean, they didn't take a breath to think. I start saying, he was a fraudster because he did this and this. I think that this is like very cult-like because it's like this. And this health claim is not supported by science or any kind of evidence at all. And they would respond with these just perfectly packaged and very clearly rehearsed responses that they had heard from other people in the company.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, well, the government's trying to suppress Young Living essential oils because they know it's a threat to the medical system. Okay, can you show me specifically where that comes from? Well, no, it's just obvious because you're saying this and you're just parroting their propaganda. I'm like, I got this from an independent journalistic outlet from the 1980s and early 90s.
Uh-huh.
It has nothing to do with the government. Can you show me, like, substantiate this whole story you're painting? No. Okay, well, you agree that this is not scientifically backed up, right? Well, if you go on PubMed.com, you can actually search essential oils and find tons of articles that list studies about essential oils. And I would do that and go, okay, you know that PubMed.com is just a database that contains studies and journal articles that either never went to publication, did go to publication, but were criticized. It contains the original Andrew Wakefield vaccines cause autism debunked study. You can find anything on PubMed because it's just a database. It's not like a database of only the reliable and best quality peer-reviewed evidence, right? And also finding an article that says we dropped Young Living and Angelica light oil into a petri dish of tuberculosis bacteria, that doesn't actually generalize to the claims that you're trying to make. So if you drop essential oils into a petri dish with bacteria on it and the bacteria dies, that's not very surprising. Tequila actually will give you the same result. Alcohol is an antibiotic in that context. But if you drink parts of angelica oil because you have cancer, or rub frankincense on your tumors, which they did to my dog at one point, she died of cancer.
Oh.
It's not going to actually do anything. You realize that this retort of yours is only valid on its face level. If you dig into this is nonsense. And the emotional reaction that I got for pointing that out was not okay. To the point of abuse. It was so vitriolic in response to me.
Did they ever use the term or the phrase, God uses imperfect people? Like, we never claimed he was perfect, but God uses imperfect people. That was one they say about Joseph Smith a lot.
Oh God, I wish that they had said that early on. That became a thing later on, which maybe we'll get into. But at first it was, no, Gary Young was directly led by God to develop essential oils. And we have actually been, this is something they said, we have been called by God, given a mission to take essential oils, which Jesus actually wanted us to do, to the people, to show that true medicine is essential oils, and true medicine is a Christian practice that the disciples did. And that was actually taken out of the Bible by the Catholic Church.
Whoa, this goes deep.
I just could not believe how deep this went so quickly. You know, within a year, my parents were saying things like this while being very strict and, what's the word we like to use? Discerning believers for all their lives. Eventually, in these arguments, though, this is really the crux of how this interacts with Christianity for me. They start saying, well, Drew, if you doubt all of this stuff, if you doubt what other people are telling you about essential oils, what you're hearing from Gary Young, at least you can listen to us. We have personal experiences with these oils. You know, your mom has been cured of such and such because of the essential oils. Such and such, your sister, your dad, whoever has been cured of such and such because of the oils. Can't you at least just trust us with that and believe in essential oils and our mission to spread them because of our personal stories? And by the time we got around to that, I was in my last year of my bachelor's in psychology, and I had studied how, you know, in scientific research, you don't take single data points, you don't take anecdotes as evidence of larger trends. You haven't established causal links, you haven't controlled for confounding factors and variables, we call them. So you can't just look at somebody's personal experience and say, therefore, this phenomenon is verified. You have to have a whole body of data and to control it and manipulate it and analyze it in certain ways to be able to say anything close to that. So I responded, no, I mean, it's not that I don't love you. It's not that I don't trust you as a person or something. It's just, I can't believe that this thing cures cancer because you said that it helped with your pancreatitis. And then their response was, well, if you don't believe in personal experiences for verifying, you know, these grand phenomena, then why do you believe in God?
Whoa, they hit you with the why do you believe in God question?
Yeah, I mean, we believe in God because of our personal experiences, right? We believe Jesus died on the cross, sure, because of history, but ultimately because we know that we've heard Jesus speak to us. We've heard Jesus or felt Jesus move through us during worship. And that's how we know that Christianity is true. We feel it in our hearts. You're saying that you don't believe in feeling something in your heart to know it's true?
Whoa.
I don't really remember, to be honest, exactly how I responded. It might have had something to do with, oh, I don't put God in the same category as essential oils. Maybe I said something like that. But it was honestly kind of a traumatic thing to even be asked, because it did set me on the path of trying to answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately I did come to, oh, when my friend looks over at me and says, can you feel him because of the bass drum? She's experiencing something that she thinks is God for the same reason that my parents think that their headache went away because of essential oils. You know, there is some correlation, and they are drawing a causal link between factors that affirm the thing that they want to believe. Am I doing that when I believe in God because I know he spoke to me when I was at church camp, or, you know, that I can feel his hand in my life, or when I interpreted events in my life to be evidence of God's will or direction? I was pretty shattered by this question, and by the realization that the honest answer to the question was, no, I can't believe in God because of that. There has to be some other reason to believe in the supernatural at all. And as I continued in my education, as I continued looking through Christian apologetics, especially people like Lee Strobel and C.S. Lewis, I realized that Christian apologetics really ultimately does come down to the feelings that we have, the experiences that we have within our communities, with God, in prayer, and that the historical and scientific evidence is really just so-called scientific and historical evidence. By the time I graduated college, you know, I was the first person in my family's history to ever have a degree that had anything to do with science at all, even with psychology being a soft science. No one in my family had ever learned about controlling variables. None of us had ever learned about discerning sources, both historical and scientific, for their validity. And I simply could not maintain the beliefs that I grew up with, given that they just didn't hold up to scrutiny. All of that came back to, well, if you don't believe in essential oils because of our personal experiences, why do you believe in God because of your personal experiences?
Whoa. That's a lot to untangle. I'm wondering if you could give me an example of one of those spiritual experiences you mentioned and how you reinterpret it now. I've been thinking about this a lot with fast and testimony meeting within the Mormon context. Everyone gets up. I like to bear my testimony. I know this church is true. And I've talked about it with other people from fundamentalist Mormonism and how they're like, yeah, we knew that our church was true too. And then when I went to the mainstream Mormon church, they were saying the same thing. And that's when I was like, you both can't know because you're both, separate. You're both doing things wrong, or there's flaws in this. How do you know for a fact that something is true? So I want to hear your experiences, any sort of validation as a child that yes, this is God, this is real, this is the truth, and how you reinterpret that now.
So I'll give you one that happened actually not very long before my parents got into, my entire immediate family got into essential oils. So at 17, I had a doctor's appointment that was supposed to be my final doctor's appointment with a pediatrician. I was going to go to a grown-up doctor after that. And in that doctor's appointment, they did an EKG with standard, and they discovered that I had some kind of arrhythmia in my heart, which was severe enough that they thought that this was like a hole in my heart, which is something that often shortens people's lives. And if I was being diagnosed with this at 17, my life was probably going to be a lot shorter than we anticipated, even with my chronic illness being quite severe at that time. So in scheduling the follow-ups to see, do I really have a hole in my heart? Is my life going to be cut short? I did a lot of praying, a lot of, spiritual meditation, I suppose, especially with my parents. During the time of waiting for some of these follow-up procedures to see what the medical problem really was, I got accepted into my East Texas college, and it was like the college I wanted to go to. So I thought, there must be a reason why I was accepted into this college. I'm going to live for some amount of time, right? God is not going to essentially kill me while he also is allowing me to go to this school, which does serve him. This was essentially the conclusion that my entire family collectively came to, that no, Drew does have time because he got into school, basically. And in coming to this, there was a lot of deep convicting feelings that I had during prayer, that God was actually the one behind these thoughts for all of us. God actually was telling us, communicating to us in some way that I was going to survive, and that getting into school was evidence of that. So I go to college. At some point during college, I kind of come back and get one of these procedures to see what's going on. And it turns out that, yes, I have a heart arrhythmia, and yes, it is possible that it could make my life shorter. We're talking, if I lived to 80, maybe I'm going to live to 74 instead, rather than I'm going to die in my teenage years or in my 20s. Obviously, I'm pretty happy about that. I'm like, okay, that's cool. That's a long enough life, I suppose. And I remember getting that news, that follow up from that procedure, that actually, no, you're gonna be okay. Just like keep yourself, fit or whatever, and you'll be fine. And going to God in prayer and saying, like, obviously, I need to be grateful for this. I need to thank you. And what I want from here is I want to be, more spiritually attuned. I know that I've always been a little bit more of a rational thinker. I always need to have like a lot of reasons and evidence behind the things I believe. That's why I like believe in God and things like this. But I need to be able to feel the feelings of other people in the life that I have, which thankfully, thanks to you, God, is longer than I thought. I want to really be able to be one with your creation. I want to be able to understand other people and have deep spiritual experiences with you, with others. So please, basically, my heart, it's honestly, this is very silly looking back on it. My heart was afflicted with something terrible because we thought that it was open, but really it was closed. So I want you to open my heart, like metaphorically, to you even more, and allow me to have these feelings that sometimes I'm resistant to.
Did that affect you and create change in a positive way?
Yes, I was very much. I mean, I this was at night, and I prayed for hours and hours and hours. I mean, it was probably most of the night. And then I went to class the next day just feeling renewed, I suppose, and interacting with people and really feeling like I didn't just want to be around other people, but I wanted to hear them. I wanted to feel what they felt. I wanted to have like the purest form of empathy that I possibly could. And during this time, this was actually, I was undeclared as my major at the time. And during this time, basically decided I want to do counseling psychology, because what could be a practice of the purest form of empathy other than like Christian counseling? And so it quite literally affected the trajectory of my life, this deep spiritual experience where I could feel God's presence with me, not just that night, but moving forward for weeks and months. And as you can imagine, with that having such a change on my personal character, on my career trajectory and decisions, on the relationships that I had, I didn't want to conclude that experience was something that just came from me, I don't know, hallucinating or being in an altered state because I missed so much sleep, or because I was scared, or because I had adrenaline. I wanted to believe that it was really God that directed me to do all those things. Otherwise, what's the significance of it? I now have a way of interpreting that allows me to take significance from it without the supernatural. But as you can probably imagine, in questioning the supernatural, that was like a threat to the way that I thought about everything, including my very own person and life choices. So it was terrifying. I just didn't even want to do it at all.
Yeah, that experience. Wow, that's a lot for a teen to go through, especially when you're in the midst of college and trying to figure out yourself and your major and all of that. I've had similar experiences that changed the course of my life. In fact, my mom was just here last weekend, and my friend Amanda Ray, she's another YouTuber, she's like, why did Shalise move her senior year of college or senior year of high school to go to Portland. And I jump out of the bathroom. I was like, because God.
Yeah.
I was like, because I flipped through the scriptures and I was inspired. And my mom's like, yeah, no one could understand why Shalise chose to do that her senior year. And I was like, that was my thing. I was doing the flip and point and seeing if it was relevant and seeing if it was an answer. But yeah, I've had experiences like that completely changed the course of my life. And it is interesting looking back on that and trying to draw meaning, like you said, without connecting it to any sort of religion or spirituality, because in that sense, at the time, I was like, the church is true, God spoke to me. That
Yeah.
must mean Mormonism is true. So what an interesting deconstruction, going not only just away from spirituality as a whole, but now you're reinterpreting all of your experiences through a secular perspective, which is what you do now on your channel. How did that come to be? How did you start? How did you decide, I need to put this online?
With my social circle and my family being so thoroughly Christian, when I stopped believing in the supernatural and couldn't call myself a Christian anymore, privately in my own mind, I had no one to talk to about this. I was married by this point, and my wife was still Christian. And while she was very kind to me, did not make this any sort of problem, which is, for lack of a better term, a giant blessing to me. I didn't feel right about telling her about all my doubts and the specific reasons behind them, because I thought this is such a big change for a person to go through that if she ever went through that, it needs to be her journey to take, not a journey that I've set her on through my words. Basically, I needed to be the complete opposite of what I was told to be as a Christian man and husband. I did not need to be a spiritual leader. I needed to allow her complete spiritual autonomy. Basically, that means one person knew that I was an atheist, my wife, but I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. And as you might be able to tell, I like to talk. I decided, I've been making skate videos since I was a kid. I know how to edit stuff. Why don't I make YouTube videos? Been making skate YouTube videos for a long time. How hard is it to get on there and talk about this stuff and vent to people? And maybe I'll be able to meet a couple of people that I can talk to about this. And so that's what I did. A few months into this, in 2017, there was this blogger called The Friendly Atheist, Hemant Mehta. I had watched some of his atheist videos only after considering myself an atheist. And they very much helped me, quite literally, to stay alive. I'll put it that way. At some point, I made a video about whether or not atheism is prideful. This is something that you often hear from particularly conservative Christians. Oh, you're so prideful that you think that you know better than God, even though you don't think God exists. And so I made a video addressing this. Hemant Mehta shared this on his own website, and it ended up getting me from 100 and something subscribers to like 1,000 subscribers in about a week. And so now I had people around my channel that were actually watching. It was a small number, especially by 2025 standards, but this meant a lot to me and really motivated me to keep going. Like, okay, people like this stuff. They want to have this conversation. So I'm going to keep making these videos. I keep making the videos. I got a few more shares from Hemant Mehta, and around the maybe 2,000 subscriber mark, I got a message from a young woman in Germany, of all places. Apparently, she grew up really similar to the way that I grew up. Now, this is a much smaller minority in Germany than it is in Texas, but she grew up the way that I grew up, and she could not tell anyone. She could only communicate with other people over the internet anonymously. She still lives with her parents, even though she wasn't a minor. And my videos essentially did what Hemant Mehta's videos did for me. They kept her on this earth. At that point, as someone especially that was raised to think in a ministry mindset, I thought, oh, what I'm doing isn't just for me. It's not just affecting me. More importantly, it's affecting other people. It's doing something for other people. And this content that I make can be a service for other people who need it, maybe even more than I do. If my parents find out I have a YouTube channel and that I'm an atheist and stuff, that's going to suck. And it really sucked. But it didn't mean that I was cut off. It didn't mean that I was homeless or anything like that. It didn't mean that I was assaulted. And that's just not the case for a lot of people who grew up in the fundamentalism that I grew up with. So as my channel continued to grow, I just started thinking of it more and more as this is a service project for other people who don't have a voice because of the repression of essentially the religious cult that I grew up in, whether it was Young Living Essential Oils or fundamentalist Christianity. And now, it's been 8 years since then. I've been doing this as a full-time YouTuber since May of 2018. So it's been 7 years full time. And there's still that element of it being, for me, I like to talk, I like to express my ideas, but ultimately I try to keep everything that I do grounded in, okay, what does that girl in Germany need? What does 17-year-old Drew need? What does 21-year-old atheist in the closet Drew need? And I shape my content based on that kind of consideration. Of course, there are things that you have to do as a YouTuber to stay afloat, sponsorships and ads and stuff like that. But ultimately, everything needs for me to come down to how am I serving people who are drastically underserved as former believers surrounded by believers who wouldn't understand or treat them well if they were open about it.
Wow. Is it blasphemous to say that you're doing the Lord's work? You kind of have your own ministry, but it's, in opposite contexts. And I think that's really awesome that you're thinking of other people still and you're still in service, even if it's not what your Christian family would approve of. It's still actively helping people. And I think we're not going to get into your siblings and your family. If they believe in God and they truly believe that there's someone up there pulling the strings, I feel like you are doing God's work, helping people and helping them feel less alone. And like you said, helping them find purpose in this life rather than making a really bad choice.
Strangely enough, while everybody in my family, on all sides of my family, except for my wife, told me that my YouTube channel was awful and destructive and poisonous and hateful, after they actually started watching the content and judging it based on the things that I actually said, rather than just their impression of what atheists are like without watching, I did actually get responses that are closer to what you just articulated.
There you go.
You actually are trying to influence people to be good and maybe even I can say to exhibit the fruits of the Spirit. And while you're saying that, you don't think that God exists, you are encouraging people to love each other above all and doing that from the outside and maybe even encouraging Christians to do better in treating people well.
There you go.
And that's not wrong. Yeah, it kind of has come around to the family that I came from being so enveloped in ministry, having missionaries in my family. It's come around to them understanding me as someone that's very much outside what they think, but not totally opposed to what ministry is really about.
That's awesome. Can you tell us if your wife is still a Christian or not?
My wife is not a Christian. Years after I left Christianity, she kind of went on her own journey separate from me and was like, yeah, I don't think I can really believe in the supernatural. I'm just kind of agnostic. She called herself an atheist for a while, but didn't really care for the label all that much, which is fine. I don't really care what people use as their labels. In 2023, she actually started identifying as a non-theistic Satanist. So she does some ritual practice surrounding Satanism. It's like not believing in the supernatural. This is really more of Satan is a symbol that represents certain things that I want to embody and I like to venerate. But ultimately, there's no supernatural here. This is a very private practice that I do to enrich my life and better myself. But it's not something that has to be imposed on anybody else or has any material rather than symbolic reality.
Wow, that's interesting.
I never thought that my wife would be scarier than me, the atheist, but yeah.
That's so funny.
But she has her own YouTube channel. The Antibot is my wife's YouTube channel. She just passed 100,000 subscribers and she has a community surrounding her channel that has a lot of people who have their own kind of esoteric spiritual and non-theistic spiritual practices. And I think it's a very healthy thing. I'm happy that she has that.
That's awesome. Congrats to your wife. You're going to have a 2-plaque household over there
Yeah,
with your 100K buttons.
we're literally waiting for it in the mail. Yeah.
Oh, that's so fun. And you're probably going to hit the million soon too. So then you can switch it out.
Oh yeah, at some point. Well, yeah, we'll be a triple button house at some point. That's the goal.
Nice. Well, that's so awesome. It's been so great to hear your story and your perspectives. You are just full of so many golden nuggets. I just want to take notes as you talk. Actually, I have watching your videos. So loved having you on, hearing your thoughts. I need to get your Linda Listen moment. So I didn't tell you about this because we were going to do this in person and now we're here. So a Linda Listen is basically a sassy statement that you could say to anyone who has pissed you off, either religiously or not. But I find it, I don't know if you've seen that video of the little kid being like, Linda, listen, and he's arguing with his mom. I think it's funny, and I think it's very symbolic in ways of us who were in some sort of cult high demand environment standing up to our people, being like, no, you listen to me. So it's a Linda Listen statement, or some people are like, I'm not sassy anymore. I want to say something inspirational to the viewers. It's up to you.
What would I want to say to the people at my church who definitely say that I'm evil today, even though,
Ooh,
my
yeah,
own
that's a
family
good
would
one.
not? You make me hope that the judgment day might actually be real, that you will be called in front of the throne and have to answer for all of your sins, including judgment of people who are just trying to live their lives and be the best person that they can be without your God.
Amen. That's great. This was so awesome. So everyone, if you're not familiar, Genetically Modified Skeptic over on YouTube, where can everyone else find you and support you outside of YouTube? Do you have an Instagram? I don't think I found it. I looked, I couldn't find one.
I have just started an Instagram in the past few days, actually, as we record this. So yeah,
What's your handle?
I am GM Skeptic on Instagram.
Okay, perfect. Everyone go follow. Yeah, follow for Instagram, subscribe for YouTube. I always get them confused. Do you have any other final thoughts before we go?
You're going to be able to see a video coming up for me. Maybe it'll be out already by the time that this episode is out for you. But I confronted a cult leader along with my wife and a cult expert, Dr. Joseph Laycock, and it ended in physical violence. I'm making a video about that right now. I took a camera crew there with me and we documented the whole thing. So if you like learning about cults and that sort of thing, yeah, maybe watch my video on my YouTube channel about that.
You're speaking to the right crowd. What? That's insane. You have to tell us when it's out so that we can maybe even add the link in your description or something.
Sure thing.
That's crazy. I feel like we need to hear more about this. Maybe we'll do a live or something.
Yeah.
Because what? Is that it? Any other final thoughts?
That'll be all for me. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. This has been fun, and yeah, wish you all the success in the world with continuing your stuff.
Thank you so much, and to you as well. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Leave those words of encouragement down below. Definitely go check out his channel, subscribe, like, follow, all of the YouTube things. We do have a Patreon at patreon.com/cults2consciousness. Our newest patron, Zafir, thank you so much for purchasing 1 year. It's so awesome. And Annie, thank you for joining us over there. Of course, again, an easy way to support the channel is just interacting with the post in any way, shape, or form. We love you for doing that, even if it's an emoji. And we're going to Mexico at the end of the month, not this month, at the end of October. If you want to join us, all the links are in the description. If you like this video, I'll link 2 more down here below. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.